Year 873. On the northern coast of Norway, in a small Viking village named Skarvik, a young warrior named Eric stood at the edge of a great decision. After his father's death, he had taken over the clan's leadership, but to truly earn respect, he needed to lead a raid. A legendary voyage to the Sacred Isles could seal his name in history, but an old legend whispered of a curse that haunted those isles. Next day, a great fire was lit in the center of Skarvik. Eric knelt with 20 elite warriors before the village, swearing a blood oath to the gods. "We shall return in glory or meet in Valhalla," he roared. Elders prayed, and women bid tearful farewells. At sunrise, their longship Wolf's Fong was set afloat. With him were Rurik, his childhood friend, and Bjorn, a ruthless warrior. With no compass, only the stars and northern wind to guide them, they set sail eastward. Second night, the sky suddenly darkened. A sinister wind from the north stirred the sea into a frenzy. Gray waves rose as if to swallow the ship, and lightning tore across the sky. Eric gripped the rudder tightly and shouted, "Do not fear. The gods are testing us." A massive wave nearly hurled Bjorn overboard, but Rurik caught him at the last second. The sails were torn, the mast cracked. The ship was spiraling out of control. Amid the thunder, a ghostly landmass appeared on the horizon. Eric screamed, "The Isles! The Sacred Isles!" The sun had not yet risen. The ship, with torn sails and a cracked mast, barely reached the shore. The men, soaked and trembling, staggered onto the land. The ground was silent, eerily so. No birds, no wind, nothing. Eric drew his sword and took the lead. They moved inland, wary. Along the path, they saw moss-covered stone statues, broken bones, and ancient rune-carved rocks. Rurik whispered, "These belong to a belief far older than ours, older than time." Deep in the woods, they found a deserted village. The houses were rotting, the walls overtaken by moss. Yet inside, plates remained on tables. Blankets lay undisturbed on beds. It was as if the people had vanished. Instantly, Eric whispered. There was no battle. They fled or were taken. As night fell, the sky turned crimson. Then a scream pierced the air, not quite human, muffled and echoing, like from another world. Everyone froze. Only Eric spoke. "Light a fire. We stay here tonight." But the night would bring more than darkness. Fire crackled weakly. Eric and his warriors took shelter in the ruins of an old longhouse for the night. All around them stood collapsed roofs, cracked stone walls, and toppled pillars. The strangest part was the traces of human life still present. Dried food in pots, torn clothing on bunks, as if the villagers had been taken in their sleep. Eric assigned Rurik and a young warrior named Sten to stand guard. The rest, still wearing their armor, huddled under blankets. There was no wind, but something was in the forest. It moved quietly. By midnight, the campfire flickered strangely. Sten claimed to see a shadow among the trees. Rurik knocked an arrow, tense and silent. Then, footsteps on the roof. Fast. Eric woke with a start. At that moment, a piercing scream. Sten's voice. The men grabbed their weapons, but it was too late. Sten had vanished. In his place, glowing faintly on the ground, was a symbol, etched in what looked like blood. An ancient, unrecognizable sign. Bjorn muttered, "That's Hell's mark, Queen of the Dead." Panic rose. Eric stayed calm, but his eyes trembled. "No one separates from the group," he ordered. But then the wind began to blow, cold and whispering. The forest seemed to speak. Rurik pulled out an old talisman, a small hammer thrown around his neck. "Protect us," he whispered. No one slept the rest of the night. The whispers continued. Barefoot steps near the shore. A woman crying in the trees. But no trace of anything. At dawn, they found one more man missing. Bjorn. Morning came with silence and fog. Still, not a single bird sang. After Bjorn's disappearance, Eric faced a shaken group. Some wanted to return, but the ship was damaged, and the storm-swept sea was impossible to cross again. Eric stood firm. "We won't let this island defeat us." Sten and Bjorn's blood cries for vengeance. With that, 8 remaining warriors marched into the forest's heart. The path was marked by moss-covered rune stones. But these weren't ordinary. Some glowed faintly. One warrior said they felt warm to the touch. As they ventured deeper, the forest changed. Trees grew massive and twisted. Some trunks bore shapes resembling human faces. In one clearing, they found a buried shield and bones. Rurik knelt and whispered, "These were warriors too from another raid before us." Ahead, Eric spotted a massive stone gate, covered in runes written in an ancient, unknown language, but in its center was a familiar symbol, Thor's hammer. Eric drew his pendant and pressed it to the symbol. The gate opened slowly, as if it were alive. A cold wind and the scent of rot swept out, but just as they stepped inside, one of the men collapsed. His body twisted unnaturally, eyes frozen wide. No wound, no blood, only deep, pitch-black voids filling his eyes. Rurik whispered, "This is a place forgotten by the gods." Into the stone gate, they entered a dark tunnel. They lit torches, but the light barely reached ahead. Eric led the way, followed by Rurik and the remaining 5 warriors. At every step, the runes on the walls shimmered, reacting to their presence. The tunnel opened into a massive chamber. Bones hung from the ceiling, skulls embedded in the walls. At the center stood a giant altar with the statue of a creature, neither fully human nor animal. Its head bore twisted horns, and its eyes glowed unnaturally as if alive. Rurik fell to his knees, gasping. "This is no god we know. This is one of the forgotten ones. The old gods before even Odin." As Eric stepped closer, the earth rumbled. All around them, the runes flared with light. The temple was awakening. Suddenly, shadows emerged around the altar. At first, they were mist-like. Then they began to take form, fallen warriors, with rusted armor and empty eyes. Rurik whispered, "That's Bjorn." It was him, but no longer alive. A shadow bound to the island. Eric cried out, "Brother, I will take you back." But Bjorn didn't move. He only spoke in a deep, hollow voice. "Who remains here remains forever." A deep rumble shook the hall. The statue's eyes ignited with flame. The ground cracked around the altar, and from it rose a dark, smoke-like entity, shifting like wind, but rotting all it touched. One warrior screamed, "Run!" but it was already too late. Eric raised Thor's hammer and struck the ground. The glowing runes flickered and began to fade. The temple shook. The creature recoiled, but not before striking Eric's leg, wounding him badly. He collapsed, bleeding. Rurik dragged him toward the exit. The temple still echoed with whispers. The gate remained open, but one voice continued. One must stay. Emerged from the temple. The sun had not yet risen, but a pale light on the horizon offered a glimmer of hope. Rurik dragged Eric, barely conscious, over his shoulder. Behind them, the temple groaned and shook. The dark entity within was furious, determined not to let Eric escape. It wanted him bound to the island. They limped toward the coast. Only 3 remained, Rurik, Eric, and an old warrior named Halvar. The rest were gone, swallowed by shadows, or worse. At the broken ship, Halvar turned to Eric. This curse came with you, Eric. You must go, but someone has to stay, or the gate will never close. Eric, barely able to speak, whispered, "No, it's my burden." But Rurik, with unwavering eyes, shook his head. "No, Eric, you are our Jarl. You must live. You must carry the tale. We were forgotten, but you will remember." Before Eric could protest, Rurik and Halvar tied him to the ship's bench. Rurik handed him Thor's hammer. "Take this back to Skardvik. Tell them the truth, the cursed island, the ancient god, and the ones who gave their lives." Then Rurik turned away, Halvar beside him. They gave Eric one last look, then walked back into the forest's mouth. Tears filled Eric's eyes as he untied the ropes and loosed the ship's mooring. The wind blew again, this time toward the sea. The ship slowly drifted away. Behind him, the temple collapsed into the mountain, smoke and shadow rising into the sky. From the island, one last scream echoed. Neither beast nor man, only eternal loneliness. Days later, Eric returned to Skardvik, scarred, exhausted, almost unrecognizable. But the hammer in his hand and the sorrow in his eyes told the whole tale. No one dare return to the island again. But every year, Eric walked to the shore alone, drove Thor's hammer into the sand, and prayed for his lost brothers. Because some curses are never forgotten, and some bonds are eternal.